Any author, playwright, or screenwriter worth his or her salt knows the golden rule of effective writing: show, don't tell. And the narrative of Ruth shows the faithfulness of God, unfolding through the ordinary lives of men and women through dramatic tension, action, setting, symbolism, and dialogue. And this is to draw our minds in, that we might find ourselves part of that same narrative. Think about the time of harvest, the setting of much of Ruth's action. Harvest is often accompanied with the idea of fertility, the fertility of the land connected to the fertility of the people throughout the Old Testament, the provision of bread, the movement from leaving the homeland and coming back, of return and exile. These are all themes that repeatedly show up, and it's meant to cue our minds to realize that the story God is telling in Ruth is the story of our lives. It's the story of the world. And so Ruth offers a powerful corrective to our modern tendency to divorce God's work from real life, so to speak, and recognize that God not only writes the stories of our lives, but he calls us to live by faith as actors within his unfolding drama, submitting our will to his and playing out our part with humility. We live in the same world as Ruth with the same God. The same God who lifts up the humble and inclines his ear to the needy is our God in the present day. And this world is a world in which God acts in subtle and often surprising ways. This is Understanding Ruth. Ruth chapter 2 opens by introducing Boaz, a worthy man and a relative of Elimelech, who is Naomi's deceased husband. And this foreshadows his role as a kinsman redeemer, somebody who can preserve the inheritance and provide for the family of a deceased relative. Ruth, who is the faithful daughter-in-law of Naomi, is unaware of God's grand purposes, but she courageously goes to glean grain in obedience and faith to Naomi, risking her own safety as a foreigner and as a woman and as a widow. And by chance, she finds herself in Boaz's field, which is obviously not according to chance. It's by God's divine providence that brings these two characters together. Boaz arrives, and he notices the worthiness of Ruth's character by hearing a report of her fidelity, of her faithfulness to Naomi, risking everything out of love and generosity toward her mother-in-law. And this extraordinary kindness is what Boaz latches onto. He sees her worthiness. And as Ruth gathers abundant grain and is able to provide for Naomi, Naomi is brought back to life. She learns of Boaz's identity and realizes that God's hesed, his faithful love, his generosity, has not abandoned her or Ruth. But they still have to wait. They still have to wait to see what God is going to do. And in Ruth chapter 3, we see the plot progress forward. As Ruth and Naomi hatch a plan, Ruth encounters Boaz at the threshing floor, and then the two women reconvene at Naomi's home to discuss the events of the day and look forward to the future. Let's look at each of those parts. First, Naomi's plan. Ruth 3, verses 1 to 5. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz a relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." Again, Naomi just comes to life after hearing about Boaz as a potential husband for Ruth. Now, she certainly considers the possible outcome that Ruth may serve as the key to redeeming her husband Elimelech's line. But it does seem like her main focus is on securing provision for Ruth. When she says, "Should I not seek rest for you?" she's talking about finding her a husband, finding her provision and protection, because she knows that as a widow, as a young widow, she's very vulnerable. Peter Lau, a commentator on Ruth, writes this: Naomi's primary concern seems to be for the welfare of Ruth. Naomi's recognition of Ruth as a member of her own family is further shown in her reference to Boaz as a relative of ours. There's an emphasis there. That Naomi has grafted Ruth into her family and continues to show love and concern for her. And in response, Ruth is faithful to Naomi. And this marks her out as a daughter of Abraham, who is faithful as well. God is going to fill Naomi's stomach through Ruth's faithful labor, which he does with this barley and this provision of bread that Ruth provides. But now through Naomi, God is going to fill the womb of Ruth, and in doing so is actually going to metaphorically fill the womb of Naomi. And so these characters are intricately involved with one another, and God is working through their relationships to bring about his good and glorious purposes. Now, notice that Naomi hatches a cunning plan. She says to Ruth, approach Boaz at night so that you don't garner unwanted attention. You don't want to unduly scandalize yourself by having people recognize a foreign woman approaching Boaz. And then as you go before him, wait for him to finish his meal and have a cheerful heart filled with wine, so to speak. Wait for him to fall asleep, and then uncover his feet and lay before him until he wakes, and then do whatever he says. Now, there's this assumption that Naomi trusts the character of Boaz. It's a very risky maneuver, but she knows that as Ruth anoints herself and washes herself and presents herself in this way, that Boaz is going to pick up on those social and cultural cues and know exactly what she is trying to communicate, that she needs protection and provision. Now, some consider the nighttime setting and the alleged sexual undertones of the phrase uncover his feet as a way of hinting at some sinful activity that occurred between Ruth and Boaz. And that goes against the whole tenor of the narrative. Remember, Ruth and Boaz are paragons of righteousness. They are embodiments of God's faithfulness. And so it would be completely out of character with regard to the point of the narrative for them to engage in sin. And one commentator notes that this is actually a dramatic device. Imagine the movie playing out. It's at night. Ruth approaches. She sits before sleeping Boaz, and you can kind of see, are they being put in a position where something wrong is about to occur? But that actually accentuates the righteousness of Ruth and Boaz. The Bible speaks frankly about sexual activity, but there's no mention of that here. And I think it's meant to show that at the point of testing, they prove themselves righteous. Furthermore, the uncovering of Boaz's feet serves a very practical purpose, to ensure that Boaz wakes up as the night gets colder. It's a subtle way for him to wake up and be alert, and so that he can see Ruth before him. Now, Naomi's encouragement for Ruth to wash, anoint, and dress herself in preparation is more than just, practical advice. It actually might suggest a transition in Ruth's character, or rather in her narrative, that as she anoints herself and washes herself, she's saying, I'm moving past my time of mourning, and I'm moving forward to be available now to marry someone else. There's also probably a practical effect in which there's no air conditioning in the ancient Near East, nor are there showers, so, it might just be a prudent thing to wash yourself. But there's also, I think, a symbolic nature where Ruth is saying, I'm now ready to move forward. The narrative progresses in verses 6 to 15 when Ruth meets Boaz on the threshing floor. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, Who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And he said, May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then, as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. Ruth follows Naomi's instructions and waits for Boaz to lie down with a full stomach and a cheerful heart. And Boaz dozes off on a heap of grain as Ruth uncovers his feet and lies before him. And then Boaz awakens at midnight to find Ruth entreating him to spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Now, this language connects back to the words of Boaz in Ruth 2:12, when he says to her, "The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Now, God spreading his wings over his people is imagery that is all throughout the Old Testament. It's a sign of God's provision and protection. And so Boaz realizes that he's got a part to play. He is embodying God's faithfulness to Ruth by giving her protection and provision. And it's a stunning reversal. Remember, Naomi tells Ruth, go to him and do whatever he says. And in response to her humility, Boaz says, I'll do whatever you say. There's this recognition of each other's faithfulness. And he realizes that she is worthy because of her humility. She places herself before him in a posture of dependence, which is how God wants us to come before him. And he essentially says, ask what you will. How should we proceed? Her humility prompts the ear of Boaz, just as God inclines his ear to those who are humble and trust him. And God works through Boaz to show his unbridled kindness and generosity to Ruth as a way to demonstrate her faithfulness and to fill her with blessing. Both Ruth and Naomi exemplify kindness and generosity beyond the call of duty. And Boaz does as well. Boaz receives Ruth's presentation as a kindness. She bears no obligation to marry this old bachelor, but she does so out of love for Naomi. Likewise, Boaz bears no responsibility to marry a Moabite woman, yet he recognizes her worthiness. It's a moral integrity that actually garners the respect of the entire town. And Boaz understands his qualification as a redeemer because he's a distant relative to Naomi's husband. But even then, he hesitates. He wants to do things by the book, and he defers to the fact that there's actually a closer relative that could operate as a kinsman redeemer. But still, there's this heart of faithfulness. He says, if that guy rejects becoming your kinsman redeemer, I will marry you. I will take responsibility for you. And so you can see already Boaz acting in a way of protection and provision, even if he doesn't really know what the response of the man who's closer with regard to relation will be. And maybe he has in the back of his mind knowledge that, you know what, he might want to take the land, this other guy, but I don't know if he's going to marry Ruth. And so maybe he's preemptively saying, look, I want to give him his chance, but ultimately I want her to know that I'm willing to go the extra mile. I'm willing to take responsibility. I am willing to cover her with my wings in the way that God does for his people. And then he sends Ruth back with 6 measures of barley, a foreshadowing of God's provision. Right? He protects her by saying, look, why don't you leave before you can be recognized so there's no scandal, protect your reputation. I'm going to tell my guys not to spread any rumors about you. So he cares about her reputation and her standing. And then he gives her provision. He says, go back with all of this barley. And again, that's a foreshadowing of God's provision, right? He is sending Ruth back with the fullness of bread and provision, just as he will use Ruth to be the means through which the family of Naomi and her husband is restored and redeemed. That God is the one who provides abundance and harvest and brings life out of death. In the final section, Naomi and Ruth reconvene and discuss the events of the day, the prior day, in verses 16 to 18. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.' She replied, 'Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today.'" Naomi rejoices not only at the provision of barley, but the kindness of Boaz, who directed Ruth not to go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Now notice that the author places this key piece of information in the mouth of Ruth rather than Boaz, because he wants to show how Ruth is the instrument of God's kindness. And think about that key word empty, right? Boaz tells Ruth to tell her mother that you are not going to be empty-handed. Remember, Naomi, when she returns home, she says that she has come back empty. And God is going to fill her emptiness through Ruth, through Boaz. That God has not forgotten her. God has not turned his hand against her. He will not only fill her stomach, but eventually, in a metaphorical sense, her womb, by providing her with a grandson, one that she will hold at the end of the narrative. And so the harvest, the provision of bread, is tied to the provision of an heir, of a line that will come from Naomi and Ruth. Naomi expresses her trust in Boaz's character as well. She's confident he's not going to rest until the matter is settled. So Ruth can humbly wait. And so the resolution to Naomi's plight comes together piece by piece as God works all things together for good to those who love him. There are many things in life that surprise us, circumstances that we don't quite understand. And in those moments, I think Ruth is instructive because it's showing that the temptation to believe that there's nobody writing the story, or nobody good, or nobody that has our best interests in mind, often can attack us in profound ways. And we look at the story of Ruth and realize that despite things that appear to be setbacks or things that seem to happen by chance, God really is writing the story. And that we have a part to play. We're not just sitting on the sidelines, but God calls us to respond to his providence with faith and obedience, trusting that his purposes will prevail. And we can see through the life of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz that God is the provider of bread. He does not leave us stranded. He does not leave us in our situation forever, but he has promised to be our Redeemer, the one who spreads his wings over us with provision and protection.